Welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast, where strategic leaders get straight to the topics, strengthening our awareness and sharpening our minds. The Pen Leader Podcast is produced by Roar, a production division of Mays & Associates Ltd. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Now here is your award-winning host, Dr. Shanda Gore.
And welcome back to the Pen Leader Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about from strategy to sustainability. And I am glad to have with me Mr. Niels Brabandt, who is the owner and founder of NB Networks and is a sustainable leadership expert. He's done some books and he's very well known in this particular community with understanding and being able to help leaders move to that next level. He worked with Microsoft's largest independent certified partner for learning solutions, and he's been working with them for a number of years. And he's also had this technical background. I had the pleasure of being on his podcast and hearing more about, how he's actually talking about AI in these different areas, which are helping leaders move again to that next level and being sustainable. So without further ado, welcome, Niels.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Hello, Shanda. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I'm going to get right into it. Can you talk to me about the concept of sustainable leadership? And I know that's central to your work. Can you explain that?
Yes, of course, that is something I'm now doing for more than 20 years. And of course, I could talk weeks about that. But when we focus on what we have in sustainable leadership today, the usual issue is that organizations say that they focus on the human being and everything is for the employee, et cetera, et cetera. And usually it ends up being all marketing. Basically, it's all talk, no trousers. Some organizations are doing reasonably well or even very well with focusing on sustainable leadership. However, when we look at the study that the CMI, the Chartered Management Institute, did in London, 82% of all leaders that we have on this planet received 0 seconds of leadership training, coaching, mentoring, name it as you like. Just imagine I would turn up at any business. Let's say you are building bridges and you're hiring engineers, and I turn up at your door and say, hey, I like bridges, didn't do the study or any training on it, but do you have a job for me? You probably would say, no, you need a bit more foundation to actually do that. And I'm very happy that these companies do that because I want to go over bridges that are actually built by professionals. However, with leadership, we just say, yeah, you didn't learn it, no problem, let's just go. And 3 months later, you wonder why on Glassdoor.com people aren't raving about your organization, but talking about your organization maybe in the way you actually do not want to have. And what often happens is that then companies call us and say, well, we're doing well, it just needs to get a bit better. And the reality is nothing's going well. Sometimes even lawsuits are already on the table. And then they say, we need to lead better because let's face it, people don't leave organizations, people leave people.
Yes.
And you don't want people to leave because that's the most expensive moment that happens in an organization when someone you want to keep suddenly moves on. And we help you to actually master the concept of sustainable leadership. It has an immediate impact. You have higher motivation, higher productivity, less employee turnover, and that immediately affects the bottom line. So we are not one of these businesses which talk about motivation, inspiration, blah, 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 because that's just all non-scientific chumbawamba. We have the scientific foundation. I have the real world experience. I was an international manager for a long time, had my own business, built this to international size, and then successfully sold it. I'm not saying that to show off. I say this because I've been there. I've done that. And as soon as you have better leadership, you immediately have more profit. Because let's face it, there is no shame in talking about you run a business for profit. That's why you started the business in the first place. And sustainable leadership is the easiest and best way to make more profit.
It's interesting you say that because when you have leaders, on paper, so let's break this down. You have someone who's, again, looks great on paper. Their CV's fantastic, but they get into a workplace and they're supposed to lead, but they run into this situation where they're really managing. And, can you talk a little bit about that experience when you can tell, again, someone who looks great on paper comes in the organization, and especially when they're supposed to turn an organization around. What advice do you give to boards or to groups that are trying to hire their next best leader?
Yes, so first you have to understand you need to be a manager and a leader. Often people use these terms interchangeably, and that's factually wrong. The role of a manager is to turn resources into value. So you have a certain set of resources, you have certain tasks, you use the resource to fulfill the task, and a certain value usually is created at the end if you did everything right. And the value is usually measured in certain KPIs and certain numbers, and often driven by profit, which is perfectly fine here. However, what often people miss out on, leadership means that the human side of the business is covered as well. You can be the most perfect manager, and after your 4-year term served and your contract comes to an end, everything is perfectly well and the balance sheet looks great. However, you were leading so non-sustainably that the next 4 to 5 years, it will all catch up on you. I give you a very simple example. When I would tell you, we talk about the German train system, people often say, oh, the German train system must be perfectly in shape, must be very punctual because German efficiency, ha ha. And here's the reality. Nothing of that at the moment is happening. They didn't invest in the infrastructure for many years. The government gave the German train system the task that the balance sheet needs to look great. There shouldn't be any more debt. So they saved money, didn't invest in the infrastructure. For many years, the balance sheet looked reasonably well or even very good. And now suddenly everything is falling apart. And that is exactly the difference between a manager and a leader. A manager focuses on getting this number to the point where it should be, which most people can figure out one way or the other. However, a leader is someone who also knows when the number is there, does this actually still look good in 5 years, in 10 years' time? And when I talk to boards about this, you sometimes have managers who have no interest in the long run because they know, I come from a prestigious university, people have birthright privileges, and they say, look, in my life, I will do 3 or 4 contracts of 5 to 8 years, go there in the short run, and after me, I don't care because I move on. You need to take care that these people don't get in charge. Leaders are the people who know what I do is sustaining for the future, and it works even after I left. People will look back at it and say, that decision was a good one. And knowing how to do this, knowing how to lead human beings, and also being genuinely interested in human beings is a core task of sustainable leadership. Very often when people come from university, and I have them sitting in my classes after a while, they say, well, I'm now a leader. And every single day someone shows up and say, oh, I need to have a day off because I need to go to the vet because my dog's sick. And now I have the day off because something's going on with my child. And now I need to have a day off because I need to go to a festival. And can we talk about my paid vacation off, etc.? And then they ask me, when does this stop? When am I just sitting there and leading and it actually is just working? And the answer is never. If you're not interested in human beings, hear the news. Do not become a leader. You need to genuinely be interested in human beings. Otherwise, this job is not for you. However, unfortunately, even business schools often focus on very much the technicality. So the leadership training at universities is becoming better. However, it's still focusing very much on certain buzzwords, technicalities, and don't show people how the reality is. Often because many people at universities and business schools, and I'm not talking down on them here, many people, especially in the US, are doing brilliant work there. Many people have never been a leader, and that's why they can't know. So very important is the concept of sustainability is complex. However, I know that when you ask companies for money for coaching or a workshop, they say, does this actually pay off? As soon as you have better leaders, you have more profit. And that's the hook, how you can convince people how to invest in this.
I would actually even say, go even further. I mean, great points. You know, when they say, well, it's a soft skill, what you're talking about. It always blows my mind when I hear people say soft skill. This is not a soft skill. In fact, It is critically important to your bottom line, and individuals have a choice. The great employees, I said, listen, the great employees have choices. They're being recruited to other great organizations, have great culture. And what you're talking about is culture. You know, culture is sustainable. It is saying that, again, you should be able to take a vacation and have your team being able to run and work without you, and that you're not having to be called every 5 minutes. That's a micromanager and not a leader. And so I think, to your point, I hear so many elements there of what I've seen, and individuals saying, I don't know when you're getting a chance to lead. When is it that I can get to the bottom line? All this other stuff is in my way. Well, that stuff is the human element that if you don't do that right, people are not motivated to work for machines. They're motivated to work for leaders. They're not even motivated to work for managers. You know, you can lay a policy on the table and say, well, just follow the policy. You don't really need me. Well, that's not even managing. So just, I think, to your point, that human element and that culture and then that measurable, because it does have, these are not soft skills. You really will see it in your bottom line. And people want to work for great leaders.
Absolutely. And when you look into science, there's a very clear set of rules in leadership that just work, which you simply have to know. You need to know what transactional or transformational leadership is. You need to know what situative leadership is, how to apply it, not only the theory, but also the real world practice tailored to your organization. There are certain sets of rules which you then need to adapt, and that's where leadership really happens. However, very often we have companies who pretend they care about leadership, and what they really care for is how to get the quickest money out of someone, and then you wonder why people suddenly don't work for you in the long run but leave as quickly as they can, only using you for your CV and leave the quickest way possible.
That's right.
It comes down to one aspect. When an organization is not going well, the issue is usually not with the people standing in the production facility not doing things right there. Often wrong decisions are the reason, and bad leadership is the core issue of most problems we have when organizations are not running well. I mean, we had mobile companies, without mentioning the name that there was a world leading mobile company before Apple took over everything together with Samsung. And that probably now people can figure out which one I mean. In the 90s, they had 50% plus market share. And when they went broke, when everything ended, their CEO with his final speech said, "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost."
Oh,
Imagine that level of ignorance on board level, saying we've failed with the whole business, but we didn't do anything wrong on the leadership level. So it is unambiguously clear we need better leaders. And also, and that is the reason why many companies now move towards training their leaders and coaching them professionally, it's not because they want to, but people see there's a workforce shortage, there's a talent shortage. When you look at the birth rates, it's not getting any better. And then, of course, you have to make the situation more comfortable. I remember when I joined the workforce after universities at the end of the 90s, unemployment, especially after the reunification of Germany, was way beyond 10%. So when anyone said, "I don't like it here," the answer was, "You can leave. There are 10 people in front of our door who want your job." And today there are not 10 people, there are not 5, there are -2 people in front of your door. So you really have to take care that people want to stay in the long run, because as soon as people leave, it probably takes a month to get the job ad out there. It takes 2 months to find the right people. Then they start. Then it takes 6 months minimum until they can work productively, if not longer. So pretty much a year. And that's why we now have these vacancy calculators where people can simply see when a job is vacant, how much does it cost? And that is
yes.
tremendously expensive very, very quickly, especially in specialized fields. So when you say sustainable leadership, you never learned it, you don't need it. Congratulations, you are already on the route how not to do it right. And other people will outperform you. The question is not if, the question is just when.
Yeah, how long can you really move forward without that? And there's been also situations where organizations will say, "Oh, we have a great leader." They hang on every word that particular leader, does, or again, they're shaping the organization. But when that leader is removed, the organization falls apart because they really leaned into that cult of personality and not really into understanding a sustainable culture. And if the leader was that great, they would have created succession planning. They would have actually thought
Yeah.
about, if I'm not in, or if what that's what you want. It's not about you, it's about the organization. And that's hard to separate. Some, personality constructs don't allow for that. I get it. And once you recognize that individual, I think to your point, you don't want to put them in charge because you're going down. You may be successful. You might have, and I profile a number of leadership types in my book, Pin Leader Path, and we talk about like what that looks like. But there was also some level of ego of like, you can't do things without me. If I wasn't there, you wouldn't be. And there's some level of understanding that it's not about you. It's about the organization, the mission, the vision. And then you want to get that lined up. Some of my HR partners, they're looking at me and they're saying, "Are you telling me that there's some individuals and it may not be the right fit and you're going to try to encourage them to leave?" I said, "No, you don't want to encourage them to leave. You want them to really get them to self-reflect on if this is the right place for them. And if it's not, you need to find the right person to get in that seat on the bus. If not, you're going to have a problem and they're going to turn toxic on you." And it's hard for people to believe that people would turn toxic, but they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, not only people turn toxic, some people who then think they do something about leadership, especially unfortunately in the English speaking world, some people love to listen to motivational, inspirational speakers, and there might be a business space for them somewhere. However, leadership is backed by science. When you think there is some speaker, you go to a 45-minute keynote, pay $400 for a ticket, and then you get the magic phrase and the magic. None of that stands up to public scrutiny. I mean, you have the scientific qualification to doctoral level, so you know what you're talking about. And I think leadership is one of the fields where you don't need to necessarily have the degree, but you need to know the scientific backing in one way or the other. You cannot just go on and say, oh, that speaker told me that one liner and that speaker told me that one liner. Unfortunately, you have quite a number of leaders who unfortunately tend to listen to motivational speakers because they put out messages that they like to hear. For example, you have to do the hustle. And when you do the hustle, you have a career. You have to work 80 hours a week and everyone will appreciate you when you work 80 hours a week. I can tell you numerous jobs where you can work 100 hours per week. And what they do is they say thank you and they move on and nothing's
Yes.
happening afterwards. So look at the science. I know that science sometimes can be a bit hard to learn and it can be boring, but there are people out there like probably us, you and me and others who can help you to digest it easier. Professionals are out there to help you learn it. But when you just go by another random motivational book, another free webinar, another YouTube video, you
Yes.
will not succeed. And also, it's also basic economics. You have to invest in something to get a return. If you want to be a freeloader and just take everything for free, you will probably get the result on the same level, roughly around zero.
That's exactly right. I was just thinking about an article that I was in a recent paper, and someone had responded like, well, everybody's a leadership expert. I wonder what they charge. And someone responded back, well, she's a doctorate in this area. She's got the education to be able to do it. But I don't just have the education. I also have the experience. And I think that you couple that both, and that scientific, it's got a measurable on it. It's not something that you just you take a certification and you go out there and you start, now it's a line of area that you start telling others, oh, I'm a leadership expert, and you go in or you buy into a system. I always talk about you have to be careful while buying into systems because many of them are not customizable.
Do this personality test, and after 20 questions, you can figure out who you are. Well, we are going to close the whole department of psychology then at universities? No, we don't. For a reason. The New York Times, for a very good reason. I mean, you have the experience. I was an international manager as well. So you need to have the scientific backing and the real world experience. And when you're a bit entertaining, to be able to transfer knowledge to people, that also helps. Some people say, I'm a German with a sense of humor. That might sound disturbing to many. I can understand that. However, it is crucially important. You have way too many of these personality tests and anything similar pseudoscientific out there. And sometimes organizations make career choices on the back of these personality tests. And that cannot be sustainable. It was the New York Times who wrote a great article and it's still available for free. The New York Times wrote the article, Personality Tests Are the Astrology of the Office. And I think that really brings it to the point. Harvard Business Review published, you cannot understand a human being by a personality test. You might take this test to always look at the published independent research on the testing system, not paid research. Public peer-reviewed research on the matter. And when you find this, and then there might be a certain hint, an idea, or a direction a personality test can give you as your personal feedback. I give you that, perfectly fine. But you cannot say, and I can tell you, I went to corporate America because I worked there. And we once had a leader who was fortunately replaced after 18 months. They did a certain test with us, and we ended up getting colors. It was either red, yellow, green, and blue. And then this leader said, okay, so red and yellow are the leaders, and green and blue are the people doing the background work. And that is plain wrong. As wrong as it gets. Fortunately, that leader was replaced after 18 months. So you need the scientific backing if you like it or not.
Yes, I agree. And again, it is something that you can use to say, well, and some people, there's different elements like, oh, this describe me well. I'm glad but that starts the conversation of know thyself, that intrapersonal intelligence, I talk about the 4 intelligence that you really need to be an effective leader. And intrapersonal is one of the ones. You're doing that self-reflection. You sit down. What's motivating you? What is it? What's your vision? What's your mission? Where are you going? And then how are you interacting with others, which is the interpersonal. And then the emotional intelligence. People can have all of this and emotionally have these triggers that in a workplace and it can ruin a culture immediately because they're not even in touch with that piece. And then the last one, and I know you and I've talked about with artificial intelligence. So, you've got to start again, leveraging some of these tools that are out there or you're going to be left behind. I have one last question for you. It's my fun question is, what are you reading and what are you watching?
Yeah, it might sound a bit boring, but one of the reasons why I went into the business where I'm actually in, I'm actually reading scientific journals. I know this is horrible for many people to say. When you go on my LinkedIn, you find a reasonable number of education from Coursera, edX, all scientific from probably quite renowned universities. I am interested in science as well, so I read science, I watch science. We have something which it is a German podcast which is called Nova, where they record lectures from universities and I like to listen. I know this sounds horrible to probably 90% of humanity, but I'm genuinely interested in finding out how actually things work. So I usually like to listen to people who know what they're saying. So I always look for 3 aspects. Number 1, do they have a real world track record in what they're talking about? Number 2, do they have a scientific backing? So the scientific backing doesn't need to be a degree, but I need proof for what you're saying. And the third thing is, we can all learn how to be a bit more entertaining, a bit nicer, transferring knowledge from A to B. I just can't listen to people reading out scripts to me. So it needs to be reasonably feeling something where the real world connects with the scientific backing. I don't want to stick it to certain schools. However, I'm a big fan of Peter Drucker, for example, with everything he has done in the whole field. Harvard Business Review publishes great articles on that. So when you look into the scientific field, you usually find me in this scientific field. That's what I listen and read. That's just my thing. And besides that, I've been a referee for many, many years in football, for the Americans here, soccer, Hamburg is my team in Northern Germany. We might get back promoted to First League, Bundesliga back. Maybe. Let's don't be too positive. In the last 5 years, we successfully managed to mess it up in the last minute of the season. So let's don't be too positive. Yes. So that's what I'm actually listening to. And besides that, I'm listening to electronic music. I'm a big fan of electronic music, listening to it ever since I'm 14 years old. So you find me in electronic music clubs all over Europe. Usually I live in Zurich and London, so you find me in the electronic music clubs all over there. That's basically what I do when I'm not working. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing that wisdom and giving us some other things to listen to and possibly read.
Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners who have shared the show and who like it and continue to get it out there for us. We appreciate it. You can also get the Pen Leader Path, which is out on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and across a number of platforms. You can actually download that on both as an electronic read as well as get it in paperback and hardback. And we'd like to thank our sponsor, Jody Zink from ESP Realty. So with that said, until next time.
The Pen Leader Podcast is hosted by Dr. Shanda Gore and brought to you by Mays & Associates Ltd., creating customized solutions for growth in the areas of leadership development, strategic planning, and culture building. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Pen Leader Podcast and share with others.